Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back in Chicago. I spoke here about a year ago, right after the election, when you guys were on high that your governor race was won. Thanks to Laura and Eric and Kenton for introducing me. I can't state how important the Supreme Court is. I also can't state how bad Republicans have been at appointing Supreme Court justices. And what I hope to impress upon you today is, given our track record, we need to take this seriously. And not just the Supreme Court, but as he mentioned, the Courts of Appeals, which for most litigators is where the money's at. Most litigators do not go SCOTUS. The Circuit Court is where you have, what's the composition? The Seventh Circuit now, is it close to tied, or is it slightly one dem ahead? I think it's one or two.
It's Dems ahead.
And then Posner's Posner now, so who the hell knows anymore, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, six Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 2 vacancies.
Ooh, well, let's keep those empty. So the next president is going to have a very momentous decision. Okay, the Supreme Court is getting quite old. Justice Ginsburg in 2017 will be 83. Justice Scalia will be 81. Justice Kennedy, who looks quite spry, will be 81. Even Justice Breyer will be 78. So by the end of, assuming an 8-year presidency, you'll have 4 justices at the age of 90. Okay, only Justice Stevens and maybe Justice Field have actually served that long. So if you go back through history, right, we have the Warren Court, the Berger Court, the Rehnquist Court, and now the Roberts Court. Republican presidents have not done a good job. So just to visualize this, right, here are all of the justices that have been appointed since Chief Justice Berger by President Nixon. And just to make it easier, I separated, like Tim Russert would do years ago, the blue justices and the red justices. And this is a gross characterization, but just bear with me, right? There have been 2 Democratic presidents, and they appointed 4 justices, okay? There have been 5 Republican presidents who appointed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 Republican justices, right? So 13 out of the last 17 justices have been appointed by Republicans. Certainly you would think that the court would be consistently conservative. But rather than lineups looking like this, watch it move, it's been more like that. I see if you missed it, like this, but it's really like this. I'll do it one more time, like this, just to drive home the point that in Washington, D.C., things tend to move to the left. Indeed, there was a piece of 538 saying that as justices get older, they get more liberal. Okay, we have, of course, Justice Blackmun, Justice Stevens, no relation, and Justice Souter. We have Justice Powell, we have Justice O'Connor, and Justice Kennedy kind of in the middle. Again, 1, 2, right? Takes that we're not taken seriously. Why did Richard Nixon screw up? Do you know what Richard Nixon looked for in a candidate? I am not kidding you. Geographic diversity. What a Midwestern justice, right? This is delusional. But we are still suffering the consequences of decisions by those judges. Indeed, President Reagan, although perhaps he should be commended for picking Justice O'Connor, the first female justice, she really didn't have a track record. She was a state legislator and appellate judge in Arizona. We didn't really know. And as I'll get to in a minute, good old Justice Kennedy, his origin story is much, much, much more sad. And even I put a little question mark there. That's almost somewhat in jest in front of the chief. But it's perhaps the case that President Bush didn't quite do his due diligence when making the Roberts nomination. I'll be mindful of a Wilkinson clerk in the room, and I will be respectful to the honorable gentleman from Virginia. So the theme of this talk germinated from an editorial I wrote with Randy Barnett, who's a law professor at Georgetown, in the Weekly Standard called The Next Justices. And since we published it, it's been one of the most popular articles on their site. Several of the candidates have read it. I know they've read it. They've told us. And they're thinking about this very clearly. And what Randy and I tried to do was to think of 5 concrete things, lessons, if you will, to think about when the next justice or the next vacancy arises. And we should be having this conversation now. As far as I'm concerned, on January 20th, 2017, there should be a short list ready to go. A short list of candidates ready to roll. Because in the event something happens, Justice Scalia says, yes, they've waited 8 years, I'm done, right? We should be ready to roll. and that's with or without the Senate in place. So the first lesson, and this one can't be stressed enough, is that bruising confirmation battles are worth the political capital for a lifetime appointment. Okay, Kenton said it right. We're still dealing with the decisions of President Reagan long after he's God, rest in peace in heaven, right? Hail Reagan. You know, we're still dealing with the decisions of President George H.W. Bush, even though right now he's, you know, not much in action anymore. President Clinton, I can't think of any of his policies that actually matter. DOMA's gone, right? Don't Ask, Don't Tell's gone. All of his policies are gone, but we still have Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer. Even President Obama, I mean, with the exception of Obamacare, he didn't really do anything. I mean, that's about it. I mean, he did some bad stuff, but actually actual policies, right? But Sotomayor and Kagan, they will be for a very long time. Very long time, okay? So the lesson, right? Well, you did. The lesson begins if we go all the way back to this gentleman. There's a guy named Robert Bork, who was a distinguished law professor. He was the Solicitor General of the United States. He was a distinguished judge on the D.C. Circuit. And to the surprise of not many, when a vacancy arose in the Supreme Court, President Reagan nominated Judge Bork. Now, Judge Bork's record was not a surprise to anyone. If you read any of his articles, you knew what he thinks, right? They should have known what a Bork confirmation hearing would have looked like. They should have known that people like Ted Kennedy would stop at nothing to prevent Lewis Powell, the moderate swing from Virginia, from being replaced by Robert Bork, one of the patron saints of the Federalist Society, right? So what happened? They weren't ready for the fight. They were not ready for the fight, and they were not willing to burn the political capital to defend him. Recently, the Federalist Society hosted an event in Dallas at the Bush Library, and Leonard Leo, the president of the chapter, was talking at the Bork nomination, and he related an anecdote. I think it was from Ed Meese, but don't quote me on this. And Ed Meese basically said, I wonder what would have happened if the White House was willing to fight more for Bork. Could they have scrounged up the votes? Could they have gotten over the 51 vote threshold to put Robert Bork in the Supreme Court? The world would be a very, very different place if Judge Bork was on the court. What happened next is even worse. So shortly after the Bork nomination failed, President Reagan nominated a judge from the D.C. Circuit named Doug Ginsburg. He was a professor of mine and of Lowell's at George Mason, a brilliant judge, former professor at Harvard. And shortly after, see, there's always the announcement and then the picture in the Oval Office. That's like the trend, right? Shortly after the announcement, and this was told from very reliable sources, Nina Totenberg found out that Doug Ginsburg had smoked marijuana with some students. And someone with very reliable knowledge told me that apparently Linda Green, close, same thing. Nina Totenberg called everyone in D.C. saying, did you ever hear that, Ginsburg smoked pot? I'm still going to confirm something. She had nothing to go on. She had a rumor. Like, oh, yeah, he always smoked pot. That's all she needed. And then shortly after the story blew up, he went up in smoke. In part, Bill Bennett in the Reagan White House, just say no, said we can't put a justice in the Supreme Court who smoked marijuana. Such idiocy. I can't. This one breaks my heart because Ginsburg was so eminently qualified and would have been a wonderful justice. Okay? So what happened? You strike out once, you strike out twice. The Reagan White House got desperate. And they appointed, you see Ed Meese standing right there, a moderate, as they call it, a Sacramento Republican, a man by the name of Anthony Michael Kennedy. The first clue that this was probably a mistake was that Lawrence Tribe said, yes, pick this man for the Supreme Court. Lawrence Tribe said, no, Bork is bad, Kennedy's good. And indeed, Tribe actually recently gave an interview saying, I knew he would vote to uphold gay marriage in 1988. I actually don't put that past Tribe. He's a pretty smart guy. He said some other things about justice maybe we'll get to in a minute. So the big hint was that Tribe backed him, and Joe Biden, who was then the chair of the Judiciary Committee, basically listened to Tribe and said, okay, we'll let this guy through. I pause here to note, perhaps on the waning days of the Joe Biden crescendo, he's not running it. It seems obvious, right? Joe Biden's greatest impact in the world was not as vice president, but was as chair of the Judiciary Committee. His decision and his power stopping Bork, and we'll get to Thomas in a minute, changed the course of human events. Had there been a normal Senate Judiciary chair who just said, yeah, you know what, I don't agree with him, but we'll put him through. You know what, whatever. We would not have had this problem. We would not have had this problem. Nino Scalia, 98-0. Was Robert Bork that much different than Nino Scalia? Not really. 98-0 Scalia. So Kennedy sailed through his confirmation hearing without many tough questions. And he was sworn into office. There's the chief swearing him in. And I guess the rest is history. Justice Kennedy has proven to be a mercurial swing vote who's now recognized rights to everything from gay marriage to abortion and so everything in between. Okay? Next up, we have the retirement of the liberal lion himself, William Brennan. I was actually giving a talk at Rutgers recently in Newark, and there's actually a Justice William Brennan State Park. It was very active inside, and a little bit shady, I should add. When Justice Brennan couldn't live any longer, and I'm not being facetious, he basically lived through the entire Reagan years. He did not think he could live to the end of the Bush administration. He held on another, 2 years. He would have had Clinton to replace him, but he could not live any longer. There's actually there's a funny study saying that justices tend to die in the years where their party is in power. Just, I don't know if it's true or not, but people tend to live throughout the opposite administration. So Biden and Kennedy realized that even more than replacing the moderate Powell, replacing the liberal lion Brennan during a Republican administration was a serious, or to quote Joe Biden, a big effing deal. As he said the night the ACA passed on a hot mic. So it's true, it was a big effing deal. So here we have President Bush and his chief of staff, and when wincing by a guy named John Sununu. Oh yeah, there it is, from New Hampshire. And John Sununu said, you know what? We can't have a repeat of the Bork nomination. Right? We can't waste the political capital. We need to focus on the Gulf War. I don't know what the hell they're doing, right? It doesn't matter. I don't remember what they were focusing on. But they said, we can't focus on the Supreme Court. Let's go stealth, right? Let's put through a stealth nominee. He won't have a background. This is going to be awesome. I got just the guy. And this is a young, sideburn David Hackett Souter, the judge from New Hampshire, with a guy named Warren Rudman, who is the senator from New Hampshire. And between Warren Rudman and John Sununu, they convinced HW, this is your guy. And you can see here Sununu and Rudman and Boyd and Gray beaming as David Souter sitting there meek like, ha ha ha, you have no idea what you guys just did, right? It actually looks diabolical, like these suckers. Ha, wait till he's doing Casey, right? And you know, the sweet mysteries of life, I suppose. And President H.W. Bush, you know, not going to do it, not going to fight, not going to do it. Even Time magazine, which, you know, was in the can, puts this, you know, cover story, right? Who is this guy? Who is this David Souter? He had been a First Circuit judge for like less than a year, a few months, some insignificant time. There was no record here. Unsurprisingly, once again, Joe Biden, as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, you know, made a big fuss about, you know, Souter, but I'm sure his people are smarter than Bush's people. Like, dude, let this guy go through. This is, let this one go through, right? Okay, because if they had stopped Souter, well, he could have picked, I don't know, Emilio Garza or Edith Jones. I'll get to Edith Jones in a minute. About a year later, the next shoe dropped. Justice Thurgood Marshall, who also couldn't live another couple years, had basically had to step away from the court. He died shortly thereafter. This was going to be a situation of, was George H.W. Bush willing to fight, right? Was there going to be a fight? So probably from his perspective, he says, you know what? I am not going to pick Edith Jones. I'm not going to pick Emilio Garza. I'm going to pick, you know, this guy from the EOC. He's been a D.C. Circuit Judge for 5 minutes. A guy named Clarence Thomas. And, you know, this may be debatable, but I'm sure when he picked Clarence Thomas for the Supreme Court, he didn't think he was going to have a bruising fight. He was, I think, what, they're going to stop a African-American replacement for an African-American justice, or are they going to go after this guy? I mean, I don't know what kind of vetting they did on Thomas, but they did not expect what was going to come next. I mean, the hearing started out well enough, and here's a picture of Thomas with his wife, Virginia, and here Biden and a CT are smiling. But soon enough, the hearings took a turn for the worse. I had lunch with Richard Epstein about a week ago, and there was one scene where Biden's waving around Richard Epstein's book on property law and said, anyone who reads this book does not belong in the Supreme Court. Takings, yeah. And you know, they called people to testify, like, do you believe in natural law? Someone made this point, I think you made it earlier. They basically opposed Bork because he's opposed to enumerated rights, and they opposed Thomas because he favors unenumerated rights. You can't frickin' win with Joe Biden, right? Uncle Joe. So things were, again, you know, contentious. Thomas had written about natural law. He had given speeches at Cato. He had written about, you know, the various constitutional structural issues. But then the next shoe dropped. A woman by the name of Anita Hill, who had worked with Thomas at the EEOC, came forward and alleged that Thomas had sexually harassed her. She had never made any sort of complaints at the time. Several other colleagues confirmed this. And this came up during the hearing. The timing was propitious, I suppose, for the Democrats. So what happened? Well, Thomas, in one of his more famous lines, said that this was it was a high-tech lynching. I think that was the phrase, against uppity blacks who do not agree with the majority. And he basically railed against this. Biden, to his credit, and this a lot of liberals do not like him, did not call any of their witnesses to confirm Anita Hill's testimony. Okay? To his credit, he did not let this turn into an absolute circus. He probably had no idea what Thomas was going to do in the Supreme Court. Had he known, he probably would have let everyone and their mother testify against Clarence Thomas and actually, like, you know, had the FBI check the coke can and God knows else what else, right? But Thomas made it through. What do you have, 52 votes, give or take? 52 votes. What do you mean wasted two? Oh, yeah, 52. So a judge sailed through 52 votes, okay? Interesting fact. Does anyone know why Justice White was swearing at Justice Thomas? Do you know? Ooh. Wife. Ah, see, good clerk. Yeah, Chief Justice Rehnquist's wife had just died a couple of days earlier, so the senior associate justice, Justice Byron White, Whizzer, swore him in. Now, this picture I find funny, right? There's Biden, there's Thomas. I wonder, this was after Sotomayor's investiture, if Biden was like, hey, Clarence, you know, who's the perv now? Right? No, I was kidding. Anyway, so I'm going to skip the 90s because I don't really care about the democratic process for appointing justices. And I'm going to fast forward to this momentous scene, which should be burned in our retinas. So here was the sequence, right? Justice O'Connor announced her retirement. President Bush then selected John Roberts, a judge in the D.C. Circuit, to fill the O'Connor vacancy. Then, not unexpectedly, but suddenly, Chief Justice Rehnquist died. He had been ill for some time. He had been missing a lot of hearings. So Bush said, you know what? Roberts goes to the chief slot. I got one more seat to fill. And with the chance to alter, right, and keep the balance of the court, the O'Connor seat was the key swing, right? Who does he pick? He picks his White House counsel named Harriet Miers. Miers had been a litigator in Dallas. She was the president of the Texas State Bar, and she worked next door to him. Now, the process by which Bush picked Miers is enough to break your heart. Because to their credit, the Bush administration was very good on judges, very good on circuit judges. They had a very rigorous process. People like Rachel Brand and other words, they had their stuff. But then when it came down to the Bush nomination, Bush basically started suggesting, oh, what about Harriet? Who did he ask to vet Harriet Miers? Harriet Miers' subordinate. Basically, the person who worked for Harriet Miers was asked to vet his boss. This is lunacy. And I don't like mentioning this, but the key players, and this is in Janet Crawford's book, Supreme Conflict, Leonard Leo at the Federal Society and Jay Sekulow at the, was it the ACLJ, Both signed off on Myers. How this happened, I could not fathom. Do you know who else also signed off on the Myers nomination? Harry Reid, when he still had two eyes, and Chuck Schumer, who's near the microphone. These Democrats supported Harry Myers, right? That should have been the first sign that something was really, really, really wrong. The next sign was that Harriet Myers was asked to visit members of the Senate, right? And Senate Republicans were like, oh, she's not qualified. Even the Senate Republicans were like, dude, what are you doing? And Slate had this hilarious feature, the Myers-o-meter, of how likely this should be confirmed, okay? There was a massive outrage. Ann Coulter, people at National Review, on the Vol conspiracy. I mean, we're saying, who the hell is this person? Who is she, right? Fortunately, this bitter fight within the Republican Party, the Democrats like, yeah, put her on the court, go for it, man, right? Bush withdrew her nomination, and he appointed not Judge Wilkinson, but a Third Circuit Judge, Samuel Alito, who had been a judge for about 2 decades at that point, had a very solid record. So where does this lead us, right? We have to think forward till 2016, okay? And the numbers, frankly, are different for Circuit and Supreme Court because of what was called the nuclear option, right? What is the nuclear option? Well, this is not Yucca Mountain, although it may as well be, right? Senator Harry Reid had a problem, right? Under Senate rules, you needed 60 votes to invoke cloture. So basically, for any judicial nomination, you needed 60 votes. The Democrats did not have 60 votes. So he invoked what's called the nuclear option to say for all judicial nominees except the Supreme Court, you only need 51 votes to get them through, okay? As a result, as Kenton said, in the last year, they were able to fill so many vacancies. They filled 4 seats on the D.C. Circuit, the most underworked court in the country, okay? This was not an accident. The D.C. Circuit was where they wanted to go. And so now, because of the nuclear option, we have a new matrix, right? We have a new set of rules. Because what's good for the goose is sauce for the gander. And if the Republicans maintain the Senate, which is iffy, they should start with a new number, right? The number is not 60, the number is 51. And what do I mean by that? We should no longer be trying to appoint Supreme Court justices that can get 70, 80, 90 votes. We should not be trying to get Supreme Court justices that get 60 votes. Our number is 51. We don't need, and we can't frankly afford moderates to win over, like people like, Bernie Sanders and, Pat Leahy. They're not going to vote for our judges anymore, right? If John Roberts got 54 votes, something like that. John Roberts, qualified by everyone, got 54 votes, right? If John Roberts only get 54 votes, we should be shooting for 51. And for the presidency, 50, because they can break the tie, right? One other point, and this is probably the more controversial point, right? What happens if in 2017, God forbid, one of the justices passes away? Democrats control the Senate. President appoints someone, a Republican president appoints someone, and the Democrats say, no, we're going to vote this person down. Go appoint a moderate, right? Go appoint Merrick Garland, for example. Go appoint, Richard Posner, right? Just to screw with Scalia, right? Should the president take that request? I say no. I think we should seriously start discussing and entertaining the option of leaving a seat empty. Because if you look at the numbers, Republicans will almost certainly lose the Senate in 2016. We have too many seats to defend. But in 2018, the Democrats have many more seats to defend. And it's very likely that we retake the Senate in 2018. Okay? Wait a year. See what happens. And then if you have the Senate, you go appoint Justice Wood. Justice Sykes, right? Instead of Justice Wood, right? You go, yeah. No, I was inverting it, right? You don't take Diane Wood, you take Diane Sykes, right? You take a judge who you want. And this will be hackles, right? You remember Clint Eastwood in The Empty Chair, right? How can we leave a chair empty? The judicial emergency. Well, 4-4 decisions without Justice Ginsburg aren't that bad. They're not that bad. And I don't mean to make this provocative, but we don't want another Bork, Ginsburg, Kennedy backup. right? We want our first choice. And if it's possible to wait a year, and look, you have some 4-4 votes. How many cases did Justice Kagan recuse in, right? I think Justice Marshall recused like in 40 cases his first term. There's precedent here. So this will be hackles, but keep this in mind if there's a vacancy in the first 2 years and the Democrats control the Senate. I'm almost positive if the shoe's another foot, the Democrats would do the same. So that's the thing to think about. Okay, that's lesson number 1, which is probably the most important lesson. What's lesson number 2? This involves paper trails. So there's often a sense among people who want to be judges, oh my God, I cannot have a paper trail, right? If I say something, then I won't get confirmed. You are disqualified, okay? Paper trails are an asset, not a disqualification. We do not want any more blank slates, Taylor Swift accepted, right? We do not want, to use the expression, sailboats that trim their sails, right? These are people who deliberately avoided taking stands on tough issues in the hopes of one day being a judge. For example, right? John Roberts, who I skipped over before, but I'll come back to, was very meticulous in his legal career of never saying anything of any substance. He was always the advocate, never the client. He was always expressing someone else's view, but never his own. Even his White House counsel, right? He was always working for Ed Meese or someone else in the White House or DOJ. The problem with these stealth nominees is you have no idea what they think about the Constitution. John Roberts never gave a speech about constitutional law. He never gave a speech about methodology interpretation. He didn't have to. Everyone knew, oh, he's a conservative, even though he said he was never a FedSoc member. Remember this? He said he was never a federal society member, even though he paid his dues. They said, well, my firm paid my dues. Yeah, Hogan, right? So no more stealth nominees. I mean, I could lump Elena Kagan in there. Again, she was an academic who never wrote anything. She had, I think, 5 law review articles in her career. I had more than that this year. So, and I don't say that to brag, but as Richard Epstein said publicly, she wasn't a scholar. She never wrote anything at all. When you don't write anything, you have nothing to attack you on. Indeed, one of her most, I think, fatal decisions was as Solicitor General, she walled herself off from the Obamacare case. I read about this in my first book. The day that the lawsuits were filed challenging the Obamacare mandate, Elena Kagan was emailed with Neil Katyal, her deputy. Neil Katyal says, hey, Elena, you want to come to this meeting where we're discussing a defense of the Affordable Care Act? What did Elena Kagan reply? What's your phone number? What's your phone number? From that day on, Kagan had 0 contact with the ACA, the most significant constitutional law case in a generation. The SG was like, not going to do it. Neil Katyal, you could do it. I think that was a dereliction of duty, and I read that in my first book. I think it's irresponsible. But when she got to her confirmation hearing, and Chuck Grassley asked her, did you have any contact about the ACA? No, sir. She was telling the truth. I believe she was exactly telling the truth. She had no contact with it. She had nothing to do with it. Did someone tell her maybe not to do it because she'll be a justice? Did someone even have to because she knew it was coming down the pike? I don't know. No more justice. And one other point. There was a great article a number of years ago called The Little Supremes, right? About all these all these law students and young academics who want to be justices, right? That's Justice Kagan's high school yearbook at Hunter High School, right? We do not want to reward people who grow up to be justices. These are the worst possible candidates because they often idolize the court above the Constitution itself. She had a very fitting quote from Felix Frankfurter in her high school yearbook. This one I think was more tongue-in-cheek. It's hard to read, but this is Sam Alito's a Princeton yearbook. And it says, he was a member of Stevens Hall, blah, blah. Sam intends to go to law school and eventually to warm a seat in the Supreme Court. I'm pretty sure that was in jest, but, you know, they want to do it. And I think there was a recent quote by a professor at Stanford named Pamela Carlin. She is as liberal as it gets. In fact, she proposed to her fiancé on the night of a burgerful, right, at the White House with the rainbow flag on the White House. I mean, she is a outspoken advocate of LGBT rights, and I like her. And the reason why I like her is that she's honest. She's honest. So someone once asked her, are you sad that Obama didn't nominate you to the Ninth Circuit? She would have never gotten confirmed. Ed Wellen would have a heart attack if she was even nominated, right? She was never nominated. And she said, would I like in the Supreme Court? You bet. But I would not have trimmed my sails for a lifetime to get there. Think about that. She would not have limited herself for a lifetime to get there. She said, you know, in a lawyer, you want courage. Courage is a muscle, right? Sitting on the fence does not exercise it. Standing up for your whole life as a justice, this is what develops courage. We do not want people who are justices in waiting. And this is a point that's very hard to convey. We need fortitude. Fortitude. John Roberts, for example. Why? Because this town, it's a great book by Mark Leibowitz, if you want to read it, about the political nature of D.C. But D.C. exerts this gravitational pull on judges. And again, it drifts them to the left. Right? We don't want judges to be like politicians who want to make their friends happy and compromise, because invariably compromise always goes to the left. I challenge you to think of a single compromise decision that was more conservative than started off with. Think of Casey, for example, right? That was not a compromise to the right. It was a compromise to the left, right? When our guys pivot, they pivot to the left. Their guys do not pivot to the right. This past term, the liberal bloc, the 4-vote bloc, did not fracture once. In every 5-4 decision, they were solid. Our guys break off. So in a case involving Confederate flag, they let Clarence Thomas try and make the 5th vote. We guys, we have independent minds, and I guess that's a good thing, but they don't. So no politicians. And when presidents are picking judges, they should not be looking for the sorts of things a politician would consider. Politicians like judges who are amiable and want to reach compromises. No. Friendly, nice, amiable, yes. Making compromises, that is not a characteristic, because that means they're not following the Constitution. That means you're following the political winds, and that is not what we need. I don't need to remind you of this picture. After the NFIB decision, Glenn Beck sold T-shirts with John Roberts' mug that said "coward" under it. And I could give an entire lecture on John Roberts. Maybe another time I'll come back and talk about the psyche of JGR Jr., right? But I think it can be summed up in one expression. I think John Roberts worships John Marshall over James Madison. I think he thinks more, what would Marshall do, not what would Madison do? We need to invert this hierarchy, right? Judges should be asking, what did James Madison think about the Commerce Clause? Not how would John Marshall twist and turn in a case that he shouldn't have been deciding in the first place? Marbury. Okay. So the third lesson, and this is one that will need some vocabulary change, or you're seeing, we need to get rid of this idiotic call for judicial restraint. For the last 20 years, virtually every president has said, we need to get rid of judicial activism. We do not want judges legislating for the bench. We do not want judges articulating their own policy, right? These cliches need to go, right? Because if you believe in judicial restraint, then what John Roberts did was exactly right in the Obamacare decision. If you believe that judges should not be going against the democratic process, then John Roberts did what he should have done, okay? And I want to contrast the decisions of 2 Bush appointees, Sam Alito and John Roberts, right? John Roberts, Lord help me if I go through this again, rewrote the Affordable Care Act. There was a provision, it was labeled a penalty, Congress called it a penalty, John Roberts admitted it was a penalty, but to save the law, he called it a tax. This is not an act of restraint, no matter how he conveys it. This is an act of hubris, that he will decide what the law is and not Congress. This sort of faux restraint we need to get rid of. This entire notion of calling balls and strikes simply does not cut it anymore. So a new phrase that I've been using a lot is one by a friend named Clark Neely. It's called judicial engagement. And this is the idea that courts must engage with the Constitution regardless. In some cases, you're upholding laws, and in some cases, you're invalidating laws, right? The simple fact is the Constitution is not about restraint. It's about engagement. If there's a separation of powers violation, well, then you strike it down. If there's a case affecting unenumerated rights, well, you gotta strike that down too. You can't pick and choose a provision of the Constitution you like. You must engage the entire charter. And this is Clark Neely, who works at the Institute for Justice. So 4th lessons, right? This one will be very hard to break into the skull of politicians who are wedded to the day-to-day of life, okay? No more thinking about the issues du jour, right? No more thinking about the big issue of the day. You need to think on the Constitution. I don't want to hear a goddamn word about same-sex marriage in the next justice. I don't hear a word about it. Let me make that very clear. I do not want to hear a limit that says, will you reverse a Bergefell? That accomplishes absolutely nothing. Okay? I would even say get past the Roe litmus test. Get past it. It's not going anywhere, right? Do not focus on these litmus test issues. And I'll give you an example, right? Obamacare. This was the cover of my first book, right? Who could have anticipated that the entirety of a massive law that would make you buy insurance would define the Roberts Court? Did anyone know about this? Did anyone anticipate this? Like, Justice, Judge Roberts, what do you think about mandates to buy insurance, right? Judge Ludwig or Judge Wilkinson, do you think Congress people buy insurance? This would never come up. Just another example, okay? Do you think when, President, Bush was considering David Souter or Clarence Thomas, they asked, so let's assume in 2011, these planes fly into buildings, then we have to lock people up in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Can we hold them there? What do you think about that? We're not capable of envisioning the next constitutional black swan. We simply cannot do it. Or what about this? Do you think the Supreme Court of Florida can stop a recount or force a recount if they're disputed these little hanging chads? We don't know what the next big issue will be, so stop trying to focus on the litmus test, right? We need to think about the Constitution itself. Do you understand the Constitution? And this brings me to the final lesson, and this might be the only practical lesson I have, but we need to stop asking candidates about cases because they won't answer it, right? I'll give you a perfect example. In 2009, when I should have been studying for the bar, Sonia Sotomayor had her confirmation hearing. So they watched it gavel to gavel. And some senator, maybe it was Grassley, I can't remember, asked her, do you agree with District of Columbia v. Heller, which had been decided, right? Do you agree that he said, do you agree with Heller? And she said, well, Heller is, quote, settled law. Those were her exact words. Heller is settled law. What does Sotomayor do not even a year and a half later in McDonald v. Chicago? She dissented. And she basically said the Second Amendment is not civil right. It does not work when you ask judges, what do you think about a case? Because they say, well, it's settled law. And then a year later, they change it. What you have to ask them is about clauses. Justice Sotomayor, what's the original understanding of the Second Amendment? How did the framers understand the privileges or immunities clause of the 14th Amendment? All right? What was the extent of the discussion of commerce under the Constitutional Convention? I think if you look at a letter from Larry Tribe, she may have had some difficulty with those questions, right? But the fact of the matter is, these questions test if judges know their stuff. And these have to be asked at the confirmation hearing, because then they embarrass themselves, because they'll have no freaking clue. Not a clue, right? You can ask her, Justice Sotomayor, what was the understanding of regulatory takings under the Constitution? Where does that come from? You go up and down the list, right? Tell us about the Dormant Commerce Clause. By the way, if you watch Sotomayor's confirmation hearing, she flubbed incorporation doctrine. She didn't actually get that right. It was very frustrating. I was very annoyed. So I'm sorry to pick on her. Kagan's was smooth as she was a law professor, and she gets up there. She sailed right through. So by asking to focus on clauses instead of cases, maybe, just maybe, you can actually, number one, recommit to originalism, which is a beautiful thing. And number two, highlight a justice's lack of knowledge about certain provisions of the Constitution. Okay? I'm going to stop here because I want this to be a discussion, and I mean that sincerely, because we are all in this together. There's a chance, as Kenton said, I'm a one-subject voter, a one-issue voter, courts. That's it. I don't really care about other stuff. The other stuff doesn't matter because if the courts aren't here, whatever laws we pass won't really have any significance. They'll be invalidated. So I want to hear from you and how you guys anticipate this, and questions you have. Maybe Kent might jump up here as well. But I am eager for your questions. I thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Share which candidates asked you about your tests.
About my what?
Your test. You should have always spoken with certain candidates for president.
No. Although I'll give this hint. I wrote a blog post, which my blog is joshblackman.com, on the evening of the last debate, where I praised the candidate who had changed his approach to answering these questions. So you can figure that out easy enough. Yes, sir.
Other than Cruz and maybe Jindal, are there any candidates who you are comfortable with make decent picks?
So I need to disclose I am the co-chair of the Lawyers for Rand Paul. committee. Rand Paul has been actually quite good on judges. He's spoken out on judicial engagement. He's spoken out about the Kelo case. During his lengthy filibuster, he discussed everything from Lochner to substantive due process to Buchanan versus Worley. He has a very, very libertarian understanding of the Constitution, so I am a fan. Senator Ted Cruz, I mean, in fairness, he's actually called for a judicial retention election for the Supreme Court. I think that's an awful idea. The last institution we have that's not political, this will make it political. I think that's not a good idea. Cruz has ripped apart John Roberts. Recently, Senator Rubio has come out and made some smart comments. Carly Fiorina has actually given an entire discussion on Kelo and how Donald Trump is much of a crony capitalist, and we need to have judicial engagement with the Fifth Amendment. So I think our nominees are moving in the right direction. And if you notice, during the last debate, Jeb Bush did not use the word judicial restraint. He didn't say it. He said they need to consider the entire Constitution. I think we have a meaningful discussion that's developing. This issue is far too important. If you notice, the Democrats, not one question about the courts, nothing. Even though Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders said they'll have a Citizens United litmus test, which is unethical. You cannot appoint a judge who has preordained what they think. Now, they don't need to ask them, will you overturn Citizens United? By making that statement, it's understood what they're going to do. I think that's actually quite dishonorable. Yes, from John Marshall, the chapter president, right?
Indeed, thank you.
I'm speaking there November 6th or 7th, I think?
November 3rd.
That's it, yeah.
Yep.
I don't know dates anymore.
He's a good speaker. Just a couple questions. One, when John Boehner announced he was stepping down as Speaker of the House,
yeah.
The one thing I noticed that he mentioned is when they asked him what advice would you give the next speaker, his first answer was protect the institution. And
yeah.
Although I fully agree with you that Roberts got the Affordable Care Act case wrong, do you believe that that's the same kind of mindset that Roberts has, is that as Chief Justice, he views himself as having to protect the institution of the court and the reputation? Yeah,
that's a really good question. Again, these guys have a good chapter. John Marshall spoke there last year, like 70 people in the room on immigration, so they're running a good show over there. Yeah, John Roberts, during his confirmation hearing, spoke about the courts institution, and he gave an interview with Jeff Rosen, who's your moderator. Jeff Rosen's a good guy. I mean, he doesn't agree with us, but he's a good guy, right? I actually had lunch with him last week in Philadelphia. Very, very, very sharp study of the court. And Roberts told Rosen that we need to start focusing on the court as an institution. We don't want these 5-4 decisions with 5 R's and 4 D's. And he takes that seriously, right? I think his decision in NFIB v. Sebelius was an example of that. I think his decision in King v. Burwell, basically allowing Obamacare to survive, is an example of that. I would push back this way. We are very bad at predicting the consequences of our actions, right? Politicians don't always know what they do and how we perceive. The popularity of the Supreme Court is at the lowest level based in recorded history. Despite John Roberts' best attempts to placate Democrats, he's inferior to Republicans, right? I don't know if it's half of one, 6 of the other, right? But his attempt to try and keep the court in good stead has failed miserably. Maybe he thought, oh, the Republicans will be mad at me for a couple of years and then, everything will go back to normal. Because of John Roberts, I'm standing here, right? I don't say that lightly. NFIB caused a ripple in our gravitational orbit, right? That changed. So I was like, oh, wait a minute. He's not a suitor, but he's doing something wrong. We have to recalibrate and recalculate what we're doing. And with every failed nominee, and I don't say Roberts has failed, with every nominee that goes awry, you have to. And it's not about appointing ideologues who always, toe the party line. It's about appointing judges who are predictable of following the law, right? If we agree the Constitution has a meaning, right, it should be predictable what happens there. It should not be a surprise. And Justice Scalia and Thomas, they disagree at the margins for little things, but on the big things, they'll agree, even if it puts the court in bad stead. The risk, though, and this is something that Lindsey Greenhouse wrote about gleefully a few weeks ago, citing our article, is that Republicans run the risk of alienating the Chief Justice more. It's like, the whole don't make him mad, right? Because if we keep pissing him off, maybe it'll become more like, a Berger and less like a Rehnquist, even though Rehnquist also drifted to the left as well. So, John Roberts is a young man. He'll be around for a very long time. He's going to be the chief. He'll probably be with us in 90% of the cases. Sam Alito, maybe 95% of the cases, but that 5%, boy, those 5%, those are the cases that matter, right? If he loses us in an ERISA case, I don't care. If he loses us in Obamacare, then no offense to ERISA. This is a health lawyer right here. with King v. Burrell, if I had to learn more about a risk than I ever could have cared to learn. But those 5%, right? Those are the ones that make or break the Constitution.
If I can just ask one more question. On a specific case, I think one case that a lot of people here in Illinois are paying close attention to, as well as the other 24 non-right to work states, is Friedreichs Case.
Oh, biggie, yeah.
Association. I think that has the potential to change, be a potential game changer, and I don't use that phrase as haphazardly as others. What's your take on how
the Friedreichs case? Let me explain like this. So, under a Supreme Court precedent called Abood, public sector workers cannot be forced to join a union, but they can be required to pay what's called an agency fee. An agency fee is not used for political lobbying; it's used for negotiating of labor, whatever, right? So the court said they can't make them pay for democratic lobbying, but they can make them pay for whatever negotiating costs. A couple of years ago, there's a case called Harris v. Quinn and SCIU v. Knox, where Justice Alito, I think were both of them, signaled that, there are serious First Amendment association issues with making people pay for these unions if they don't want to be a member. And Justice Alito is basically begging, bring me a case, please bring me a case, please, pretty please, right, with sugar on top. And almost immediately after Harris or SCIU, a teacher in California, there are actually Republican teachers in California, go figure, challenged the California law that requires her to pay this agency fee to the teachers union. And of course, the Ninth Circuit ruled against her. But this case was granted certiorari. Now, is this a game changer? Yeah, because if the only aspect of unions in America that's growing are public sector unions. The private sector unions have dwindled in the previous decades. That's the only growth they have. That's why they're pushing sort of a fast food, right? Because that's a beachhead that the unions can storm. But the issue here is if the court holds that unions cannot be forced to charge this agency fee, people are going to stop paying them. And you have massive free rider problems. People will say, all right, negotiate for me, which you have to do. I'm not going to pay you for it. It makes it very hard to have a viable public sector union if they can't mandate these fees. Now, what's the court going to do here? Justice Kennedy didn't do anything funky in the last two cases. Usually when there's an opinion where, Kennedy's wheezy says, well, I concur, but da-da-da-da-da, right? He didn't write any concurring opinions in Knox or the other case, Harris v. Quinn, right? He didn't say anything. So, who the hell knows what Kennedy's going to do? Maybe there'll be a picket line at Supreme Court and he can't cross it and then he can't decide the case. I don't know. There'll be a conference. They can't get the conference. I mean, that'd be funny because then Ginsburg and Sotomayor would be like, oh, no conference, no quorum. Oh, that'd be genius. They could divest the court of a quorum. Just have a picket line around the court. Oh, how about he give them an idea? Oh wow! But there's a back entrance. They can get into the back. So I think the judges will find a way in. But yeah, that's a big case. Well.
So my question was actually prompted by your strategic suggestion about potentially leaving the seat open. Say, for example, we had President Rand Paul, which I know you're on his committee. If they did leave the seat open and decided to wait until 2018, wouldn't that give an opening for something like Rand Paul to put Richard Epstein on the court as a
recess? Yeah, and okay, I didn't mention that. So yeah, what I would actually do is do what Governor Walker just did, right? He just recess appointed the person who's running for re-election, right? So Justice, was this Crooks died? I can't remember his name, Crooks, right? So the person, the Republican who's running for that office, Walker gave her a temporary appointment to the next term, and she's running for re-election. I think rather than, as deserving as Richard would be on the court, you give it to the person you want to nominate. Let the person be on the court for a couple of years. It's a lot harder to take someone off to start from scratch. Lest we forget, Earl Warren was a recess appointment. Eisenhower then put him out full time. William Brennan was a recess appointment. Can you imagine? A Republican appointed William Brennan as a recess appointment because he was a Catholic, right? Actually, Eisenhower wanted a Catholic on the court, for God's sakes, right? And I'm serious, he was a Catholic. They wanted a Catholic from New Jersey. It's a Jersey thing, you wouldn't understand. So, yeah, so I would, whoever was nominated and gets, not voted, recess appoint them. But the trick is, they'll never go into recess, right? Under Noel Canning, if the Senate never goes into recess, you can't fill them in. I don't think there are any recess appointments ever again. Because if the Senate is controlled by Democrats, they'll pro forma sessions, and that's not possible. But recent appointments may come into play. And it's a lot harder to take someone who's been there already, given a test run. I was actually afraid that if something happened, President Obama would reappoint Dick Poser or something just to really screw with Scalia. I actually feared that for a moment, but we did not. That's not come to pass. What? Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yes, ma'am.
How do you frame this issue in a way that the people are voting for the primaries understand how to make choices within that framework that you outlined today?
Yeah, very good question. This is why I'm glad that candidates are talking about this issue. The candidates are actually being asked on this stump. Yesterday, Marco Rubio gave a speech in New Hampshire, and a voter, a random voter asked her, Senator, the next president gets 1, 2, 3 appointments. How do you appoint a justice? And voters are asking about this. Again, John Roberts' decision, NFIB, sent a ripple. It made people wake up saying, wait a minute, what the hell just happened, right? We had Kennedy, and we lost Roberts. I saw every year when I teach NFIB, I go through these cold sweats. Like, did this really happen? Did this happen again? This weird deja vu. I still maybe it'll turn out differently, but it never does, right? So I think voters are actually already asking about this, and candidates are becoming more sophisticated in their answers, right? They're not saying, we need strict constructionists who are restrained. That doesn't mean anything, right? Talk about NFIB. Talk about Kelo, right? Talk about decisions where people were harmed. Suzette Kelo's house was taken away because the Supreme Court said you can make more money from a hotel than you can from a little pink house. That resonates with people, right? The Democrats talk about Citizens United every 5 seconds. That's the worst decision since Dred Scott, such Keith Olbermann, right? Whatever. But we need to use cases that people understand. Obamacare is a beautiful case because everyone gets what happened there. Everyone, even people on the street, was saying, Josh, it wasn't a tax, was it? People aren't lawyers. I'll never remember. I actually was at the Tea Party rally on March 23rd, 2010, the day the ACA cleared the House. I swear. I saw a guy with a sign that said, overturn Wickard v. Filburn, right? I didn't get a picture. I wish I had, but I didn't get a picture of it. People get this stuff when it matters. I saw Hansel over there. Yeah.
What makes you think that the Senate Republicans would never exercise nuclear option?
So this is the heartbreaker, right? I was actually at an event with John Cornyn, who's the House, was he the whip? I can't remember his title, number 3 or 4 in the Senate. And I asked him point blank, Senator, would you consider nuking the Supreme Court nomination? He's like, no, we like tradition and precedent. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So one of my other jobs for the next year and a half is to stop that, right? No, not worth it. Tradition gone. Harry Reid nuked it. Don't. You got to fight fire with fire, right? You got to nuke like Yucca Mountain, right? We cannot let this go. Sorry for the Yucca Mountain jokes if you get the FERC references. So other questions? Yeah, in the back.
So I confess I've always been a little bit skeptical of the what they call greenhouse effect, or the greenhouse effect that just sort of drift left, or because of social pressure that cocktail parties and all kinds of media press approval and all that. Just because I think you can't take that full view, and that oversimplifies a lot of the factors. But it sounds like that's, in your view, at least some of what's going on. That there's social pressure on the bench. If that's true, or if it's at least partly true, and I know this sounds facetious, but it's not intended to be. Should a president nominating a justice be looking for somebody who's a misanthrope? Somebody who's
Yes.
not the kind of guy who's
Okay. Kent and I. It's just that we had this conversation today, didn't we? So Ken and I, we had a conversation at the exact topic. Okay, so one of the reasons, so Michael Ludwig was a judge in the Fourth Circuit who was a wunderkid. He was appointed to the court like about 35 or something. He was a wunderkid, right? But he was very bristly. He had the reputation of being very abrasive. Edith Jones, who was a judge to shut up during arguments in an en banc proceeding. It's on tape. She's a friend. I like Judge Jones, but that's her personality. Politicians don't like these sorts of people. Politicians like people, hey, hand holder, glove shaker, make compromises, right? Those are the worst kinds of justices because they're trying to make compromises, right? They're trying to please everyone. Sam Alito doesn't give a damn, okay? If you know Sam Alito, he does not give a damn. Justice Thomas, my God, after what he went through, he does not give a damn. Nino Scalia does not give a damn what people think about him. He's been, pilloried from every corner. So it's not about pointing misanthropes. I think it goes back to Pam Carlin's statement. Give people with courage, right? Give someone with intestinal fortitude who can resist internal and external pressures. Anthony Kennedy definitely cares what people think about him. His entire issue is, when I go to Strasbourg in the summer, will they high-five me or not, right? It's a human nature aspect. So yeah, I like misanthropes, right? Would Edith Jones have pissed off Sandra O'Connor? Sure. But she would vote in case he to uphold the law. Would Mike Ludwig have pissed off Anthony Kennedy? Or would he have pissed off Justice Breyer? Probably, yeah. But he would vote to invalidate Obamacare. So, personality matters, but politicians should not be picking judges the way they pick politicians. You want to add anything? We had this exact conversation on the earlier today.
No, I think you hit the point, Josh. I mean, the issue becomes: when you are dealing with the people who are trimming their sails, as Josh I think correctly pointed out, those people are demonstrating that they might be very nice people, but they're not demonstrating that they understand the rule of law and what makes someone a good judge, as opposed to what makes someone a good politician. The two things are not the same. Yeah. So misanthrope is too strong. I like nice people too. I would much rather have a nice person with intestinal fortitude than a bristly Mike Ludwig with intestinal fortitude. But if you have to choose between the two, your litmus test is: does this nominee understand the rule of law, and has this nominee demonstrated an understanding of the rule of law, rather than does this person have some rough edges in terms of personality? That's not a disqualifier. You're being appointed to right opinions. Let's not forget.
Not schmooze.
I guess the whole thing is the issue with that, of course, is the political process of choosing judges and justices. And, well, people doing it are the people who live in that world, be it White House, president, senators who are involved in. I mean, is there something structural that could be changed or modified, short of just, or the only option to publish pieces of the standard reminding everybody this is what we should do?
Yes and yes. So I think the shorter answer is senators probably they take their advice and consent maybe a little bit too seriously. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I think it's an important constitutional duty. The president violated this with his recent appointments, right? But the entire idea of having to please everyone, I don't think is possible anymore. That's why I said the number is 51. We're not going for 98-0 like with Scalia. His vote was 98-0. We're going with 51. And if Republicans, they didn't like Myers because she was unqualified. They loved Kagan because she held hands. She said, "Yeah, I'll go hunting with Scalia." Like, people loved her, right? But so what, right? Bernie Sanders is not going to vote for the most gregarious Republican judge. Bernie Sanders will not vote for Don Willett, right? Don Willett's the most friendly guy on Twitter. Everyone loves him. Supreme Court Justice of Texas. Everyone loves the guy. He would not get a single Democratic vote. And I say this, Don's a dear friend. He would not get a single Democratic vote. He's the friendliest dude in the world. He's happy. He tweets about bacon and Bluebell ice cream. I mean, he's an awesome guy. He's genuine. He loves his children. He's a good human being. Bernie Sanders not voting for him. Someone has asked a question. Anyone? We'll go round two. Okay, start round two. Yeah, go.
Do you have any sense of
Does the left?
Yeah. I mean, are they getting?
You're asking me to put myself in their shoes? I don't know.
You're in academia. You have to know.
Unfortunately, you're right. Well, I don't think they care much because they look at demographics like, screw it. This election, next election will be a majority. Won't matter. This is not an immigration debate, but I mean, they look. I don't say that lightly, but that's the game plan. Like, they don't need to win now. They'll just need to wait a couple. And I mean, the Democratic pollsters have basically said in 2024, the electoral map for Republicans gets really narrow. I mean, even now, our electoral map is awfully narrow. I mean, there are 4 or 5 states that we have to win. If we lose any one of them, the election's impossible. So that map keeps getting narrower and narrower. The only saving grace is red states are adding population, and blue states are bleeding population. That actually, in the next census, will shift votes away from California and towards like Texas, but still is not going to be enough. Yes, ma'am.
It seems to me as a non-lawyer who reads the law as a hobby, that the Ninth Amendment is the most
okay.
underused,
Yeah, okay. There we go.
and I think that for me, the Ninth Amendment nullifies, makes the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, also makes gay marriage unconstitutional because they're private personal rights that people have that are protected by the Ninth Amendment. And so my private right to choose a chiropractor, Obamacare said I got to go to an MD, has been violated, and or my private right not to issue marriage licenses because I'll go to hell if I do, versus somebody else's right. I think that there's a conflict there. I don't think the Supreme Court ever. I don't find any cases.
No. So the Ninth Amendment, if you haven't read it, you should. It says you always carry a Constitution in your pocket, in your heart, as you ought to. See, atta girl. So it says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. Randy Barnett and others have written extensively at the Ninth Amendment. Read his book, Restoring the Lost Constitution. The fact of the matter is the Supreme Court has ignored the Ninth Amendment. With the exception of Justice Thomas, they've ignored the Privileges or Immunities Clause, the 14th Amendment. I love Randy's book because the cover has a picture of the Constitution with little pieces cut out. Chop a little bit there, chop a little bit there. The Constitution we have here, the Constitution under glass at the National Archives, is not the Constitution the Supreme Court interprets. And it's a very, very, very sad affair. Well,
So getting back to your point about Supreme Court justices will speak their mind and the advice and consent of the Senate. Say we have, a Republican president who gets a little wily coyote and decides to nominate Ted Cruz to the Supreme Court.
or Ted nominates himself, which is totally constitutional.
He nominates Ted Cruz.
I thought about that, yeah.
And the pitch is to the Senate.
Get rid of him.
Exactly.
Yes! Hugo Black.
To the state, just Ted Cruz with his abrasive personality does not seem to be a good institutional fit for the Senate. So
I've
to essentially tell the other senators, given Texas's demographics, deal with this guy for the next 25 years or kick him off the street.
Okay, so Lowell and I are very old friends. I had the exact same thought, so we're on the same wavelength. Yeah, I've actually thought of like a Hugo Black. So why did Roosevelt put Black on the Supreme Court? Because he was being a jerk in the Senate, was opposing his stuff, right? So he said, let me get rid of him and put him on the Supreme Court. Can you imagine? Black served, what, 30 years? So I've actually considered Chuck Schumer saying, okay, get rid of this asshole, right? I'm putting words in Chuck Schumer. I like Ted. I'm a fan of Ted. I've liked him before he was a senator. I voted for him in the Texas election, so I like Ted. But you can imagine Schumer saying, oh, get rid of this guy, right? How would Ted do in the Supreme Court? Pretty good.
How would the other senators do? I know there's a conflict between what they want personally and what the constituents would want. So
I think the Cruz nomination is basically like, you need to get rid of this guy. He'll be in the Senate for 40 years and make your life miserable. The only question I have, though, is that Ted has had a very strong political streak. And I don't know if he can pivot back to being a Supreme Court advocate. I mean, maybe he can, but he's become a very good politician. I'm not saying that as pejorative, but the temperament of a politician, even as one as rock-ribbed as Ted, may not be the best disposition for a argument, because you can imagine him going up and giving a soliloquy while he's asking a question, just going, it's talking about, the Tea Party and stuff, right? So I don't know, and I don't know how Ted would do it justice. I've actually thought that, President Ted Cruz nominates himself on the way out as Chief Justice, they kind of took a Taft type deal, but I would be slightly concerned about his demeanor as a justice in light of his recent behavior as a senator, which I voted for the guy. So what do I know? Yeah.
So you were talking about sort of maybe nominating Misanthropes to the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, that's when we quoted us, right? Yeah.
No, but I understand. But there's also the argument that you should appoint people who can produce majorities within the small society of the Supreme Court. Do you think it's impossible at this point to get any members of sort of the beehive on the left? Right, that they all think alike, they all do the same thing, they think the same things, they read the same things, they eat the same food, they drink the same coffee.
Eat the same kale, yeah.
They do all this. I mean, it's a beehive, right? They all do the exact same.
I think
they work together.
People just pop embarrassing. Yeah.
Is it possible? I mean, if we have 5 Misanthropes, will we ever have a majority conservative decision, or we have like a bunch of fractured?
Yeah. So I mean,
we already have Supreme Court cases where
8
6 or-
opinions.
Yes, there are 8 opinions, right? So how do you get to
So the short answer is, can a conservative? Thank you, Lowell. Let's do the altitude up here, right? The short answer is, break a leg, I suppose. The short answer is, I don't think it's conceivable for the conservatives to try to make a majority with liberals. It's not going to happen. I think we need to recognize that, right? There's no Byron White who will be consistently liberal but vote against abortion, right? We don't have that anymore. We don't have like a Felix Frankfurter who's quite liberal but feels that judiciary should not be making stuff up. Right? We don't have those sorts of liberals anymore. Wow, that's really bad. I'm on camera too. So we should not be thinking about forming conservative liberal majorities. I don't think that's a realistic goal. Now, what about having 8 different opinions? Well, your old boss is very prominent for writing a 70-page dissent on why the administrative state's unconstitutional, right? That no one joins. I don't have a problem with that. I like when Justice Thomas dissents because then we talk about it, and in 15 years that becomes a majority opinion. I'm okay with that, right? He'll concur in judgment and say, by the way, this is all BS. So I think 5 misanthropes can get along. I think they'll find a way to make a judgment, and if it's fractured, good. Less cases to remember, right? Because you can always argue a different way. But it doesn't bother me. Hopefully the loss of blood won't affect my cognitive skills. Any other questions? Anything else? I thank you. You've been an excellent audience. I'm very grateful. Oh, wow, that's really bleeding. Okay, there.